Hello there, and welcome back to The Closet Historian, where today I'll be showing you how I made this lantern-inspired handbag. And just a little bit of a disclaimer to say that I am no expert in handbag making, so of course I may not be using the quote-unquote correct materials or methods, but I was just trying to kind of reverse engineer my way through this project. And while I did make a mock-up, which I'll show you later, I do consider this red lantern I'll be making with you today kind of version 2, because there are a couple of steps I would do differently next time. But here's a sketch of my very basic pattern for this one. Of course, you could very easily modify the exact shapes and proportions of this to end up with a different shape of handbag in the end, but I'll be making a 4-sided lantern today with a square bottom on it. In total, my lantern pieces are 11 inches tall by 5.5 inches wide, and the arched section begins about 8 inches up along the sides. Hopefully you can see what I mean by looking at this sketch here. And these measurements I'm giving you are with my 1/2 inch seam allowance included along all the edges I will need it. And then I will need one piece for the bottom that is a square that is 6.5 inches square. So 5 pieces total, but I do need 5 pieces of my fashion fabric, which today will be a black cotton sateen, and 5 pieces cut out of my lining fabric. In fact, I will line these first few pieces to construct the entire bag, and then I will put a separate lining to the inside again. So I actually need to cut these 5 pieces out of my lining twice. And I did a curved sort of arch shape on the top of my basically rectangle for the main body of the lantern, but you could also have that be a bit more pointy and a bit more angled if you wanted to have a more pointed top to your lantern, or you could actually have it be like more stout or shorter and have a more rounded top to your lantern if you wanted to as well. Of course, you could use this same exact idea to create, again, many different shapes of handbag. It does not have to be a lantern, but of course with the vinyl cutter here in my studio now, I couldn't resist making a Gothic stained glass window inspired lantern little bag here. So that's what I'll be doing today. You could do this in any color of vinyl, that's for sure, if you have access to that material, or you could do applique, beadwork, any sort of decoration on a bag like this, or use a printed fabric. Different fabrics for different sides of it, different parts of it. You could do something sheer or layered, like layer lace over a sheer fabric to have your lantern actually be transparent. Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of different options once you put your mind to it, as it were. But I will take my sateen pieces over to the ironing board, and I've already pre-cut my HTV here. Again, this is the heat transfer flock from Sizer, not Spawn, but I do quite like their flock. It sticks well to cotton, I've noticed so far, so that's good. And I'm just going to center these and position them about a 7/8 of an inch above the bottom of my lantern here. Of course, I cut these to have a bit of space along the sides. Your results may vary and need tweaking if you're doing HTV like I am. But once I had all my heat transfer designs stuck onto my sateen pieces, I'll go ahead and pin them to the lining right sides together, leaving about 2 inches of the bottom of that, like the straight edge along the bottom of the lantern, open so that I can turn these right side out later. And I'm going to just figure out where I need the corners to be for this square piece for the bottom to be able to line this and then clip both the inverse and the outward corners to be able to create this little square that has tabs, 1/2 inch tabs on every side. That way I can turn this up and finish off the bottom of the handbag later. Hopefully, again, this makes any sense. The best way to go about figuring out this 3D sort of geometry is actually to make a mock-up out of paper or cardstock or cardboard first before you start actually making it out of fabric. So I made like half of one of these up in paper to try and get my mind again around what needed to happen. Because again, I'm not normally a handbag designer. I have a lot of ideas of what I would want, and sometimes I just get fed up with certain things not existing in the world, like Gothic cathedral window bags. It just seems like an area that's ripe for like being turned into accessories, and yet there just aren't enough out there. But if you do anything like this, do remember to leave those openings. That's the most important part here. When, I guess, bag lining all of your pieces like this, to leave an opening of at least 1.5 inches, 2 inches to be able to pull everything back right side out later after you clip your corners and curves and give everything a nice press. And yes, clip those corners, clip the top point of my little cathedral window here, and then I will clip the curve along the top of this about every centimeter or so, because I was hoping for a nice gentle curve on this. Taking my time, using a very small stitch length on this so that I don't have to worry about any of this coming undone, of course. And then I will turn this right side out at 1,000 times speed always nice. I grabbed a large knitting needle here to help me with my corners here, and then I'll give everything a nice press. This is a polyester sort of taffeta-ish lining that I picked up for something else a very long time ago, and so I have a little bit of it left. Good for something like this where it's like, doesn't matter, it's not going to be against my skin or anything, so it doesn't matter that it's a not very breathable lining fabric. And then for the bottom piece with its little tabs, again, I need to cut or clip into the corner and then cut the corners off the other corners. Each corner has 3 corners. Again, you see what I mean, right? And of course, depending on how soft or stiff you want your handbag to be, you can include interfacing or padding, different types of stiffeners in this entire project. And indeed, I add some structure later. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, I have some of that plastic netting that is used for cross-stitch. This is found in the cross-stitch section of the craft store. I find it really useful. It's super lightweight. It's easy to cut. It melts easily if you want to get rid of sharp corners. So I find it really easy to use for handbag projects or anytime I need something to stand up and be quite stiff. But I am going to put a zipper between 2 of my windows here, and I'll do that while everything is still flat. This is a 9-inch skirt zipper here, and I have switched over to the zipper foot over on my machine, but I'm just stitching that down right next to the zipper teeth. That will be like the corner of my lantern on this side. I do get a lot of questions about why I don't put my zippers in flat when I'm sewing garments. I don't know, I never have. Maybe it's easier? But I kind of like doing my zipper last, if not almost last, because I like putting it off, you know? It is probably easier to do when things are flat, but each to their own, as it were. But once I have sewn this down to either side of the zipper tape, I will actually close up the top of the lantern. You could, of course, sew this right sides together. That way you would end up with a nice smooth seam on the outside. But I'm going to sew this wrong sides together so that this, because every edge is finished at this point, and I want this to kind of stick out and be a lip along the edges as if this were a soldered iron lantern or something like that. So most of my seams here will be external, so you'll notice that as we go along. And of course the bottom of this, where I had left open an opening on the flat edge on the bottom of my lantern here, where I had left open the seam to be able to turn these right side out, that is still actually just open in there, but since everything is pressed and it'll be top stitched over later, I'm not worried about it. I didn't slip stitch those shut. You could, of course, if you wanted to do your full due diligence on something like this. But it will be caught in some top stitching later, so I'm just not worried about it. Plus my fabric's pressed really crisply, so nothing was moving around. So I took the other 2 pieces, the ones that didn't have a zipper in them, and went ahead and sewed the corners of that externally together first. And then I will start putting this little lantern together. It's going to start looking like a tall, awkward tea cozy in a moment here. You could easily make a tea cozy this way, but sadly here in America we don't really have kettles or teapots, so the need for a tea cozy, sadly, does not exist in my life. Maybe one day. But yes, back over to the machine. I'm starting about a 1/2 inch away from the bottom, and I end about a 1/2 inch away from the very tippy top here, just so I can keep those areas mobile for future construction needs, basically. So ending about a 1/2 inch away, come off the machine, and I will sew the last side together here, like so. And now the way to get in and out of this bag will be through that zipper that I put into that one corner, which is very different from how I did my mock-up, because when I made the mock-up, I had it like a drawstring bag in the top and had the top points of the windows, as it were, open up there. And so it was a very different closure method, but I thought it would be so much cleaner to just put a zipper down one of the straight sides of these buddies. Now, here is where I make my mistake on this version 2, or at least what I would change the most, or like the first change I would make for the next version, is I sewed the bottom onto this, and again, I'm using my external seams here, so instead of sewing this right sides together, I'm sewing this wrong sides together, and the seam will be on the outside. But I'm putting this bottom in before I did the structure. I think, in hindsight, I would put the little cage I'm about to make out of that cross-stitch netting stuff in first, and then sew the bottom on. I think it would be easier. It's hard to say. Maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know. This is how I did it this time. I think I would change it up next time. There are many improvements that could be made to this. Really, this is kind of, yeah, again, version 2 of what I think needs a longer engineering process, but where I'm at in my lookbook preparations, I don't have a ton of time to do 10 different lanterns, sadly, so I will just be sticking with this one for now. But as you can see, I'm sewing each length of the square on the bottom individually to its own window here. Again, external seams so that this kind of helps keep this standing up. Also, I tried first just putting a piece of this plastic netting in the bottom to see if that would be enough to help this have a little bit more structure, and it does, but the windows, of course, are not completely smooth and hard-sided, and I thought it might be nice if they were, because my mock-up, I didn't do this. I didn't put the cage inside, and it's very soft, and the soft look is just fine, but I think it looks a little bit too much like a wine gift bag, like a gift bag that you would put a wine bottle in from like the liquor store. And I wanted it to look a little bit more like a structured lantern and less like a gift bag. So, like a very structured gift bag, a reusable gift bag, but still. And like I said, this netting stuff is really easy to cut, and actually just grabbed a lighter and melted any of the sharp edges, mostly along the like triangular section of the top here. But I just used the lantern pattern and then subtracted seam allowance from each side of that to make this little cage. And then I sewed them together with a whip stitch and double thread along the corners just by hand. And then I actually made a lining, again, cutting out my original pieces out of the same lining fabric once again, to create a little lining for the inside of the bag here so that my little cage was between my exterior here and then this lining. So I'm just figuring out what corners I need to clip on this. Of course, it doesn't need to be as pretty because it's just going to be inside the bag. The only thing that will ever see this is my iPhone. You know, one of my greatest concerns when making any handbag is, will it fit my phone? Because I like a lot of miniature clutch handbags, but then I get them in the mail and I realize that they will not hold a modern phone, which does create difficulties if one wants to actually wear them out and about. But I have slipped that little net cage in here. Unfortunately, my camera had died at that exact point. But I slipped, again, this netting is kind of flexible, so I crunched it a little bit and stuck it inside of my lantern here. And now I'm just sandwiching that between the lining and the exterior. Luckily, it seems to stay in place pretty well on its own. Of course, there would be better ways to secure this if you knew what you were doing. But again, I don't really. I'm making it up as I go. But I'm just going to pin the opening of the lining along my zipper tape and then slip stitch that down along the inside of my zipper tape here, so I have a much more seamless finish on the inside now. And then I've basically got my little lantern buddy here. Just have to figure out exactly what I want to do for the handles or straps of this, basically. And here is my mock-up version, so you can see what I ended up doing for that one. I used some gray HTV on this, and I just used some cotton twill I had laying around. But I did have this, I think this is 5mm braided rope cord here, like satin cord. So I just put that along all of the edges with the knots at the bottom, kind of again to look almost like solder or iron along these seams. But I think this time I'm actually going to add some black tassels and then secure the knots and the straps, as it were, up here on the corners of my lantern this time. And I did make some really large, like oversized scale beads with really large holes in the middle. I made these out of polymer clay. I thought this would be the easiest way to get a giant bead, especially ones that were red and black like this. That would be big enough to actually thread this thick satiny cord through. So I did 2 straps here and attached them to the diagonal corners. Again, I'll have to be careful where that zipper is with the tails of that tassel because it'll be very easy to get those caught in there. So we'll have to be cautious, but that's all right. And so I can use this bead to actually get the straps all together and have them hang together, or I can just use the straps without the bead, depending on exactly what I'm going for any particular day. But here is my finished lantern-inspired handbag. I hope you enjoyed this rather quick crafting project. I made this in about, I don't know, maybe 6 hours. Probably took me a little bit longer because I was figuring out what to do along the way. If I made another one, I think it would be faster. And I am working on quite a few strange little projects here in the background, the behind the scenes area, including I need to go over onto the set and spackle a few things tonight before I clock out, so I had better get back to it. But as always, I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!